Tonight, before I say anything else, I want you to breathe. Just breathe. Because what I'm about to share is not meant to scare you. It's meant to free you. Februation, a line in the spirit, a moment where survival ends and God's supply begins. I didn't always understand this. There was a time in my life when poverty was not just something I experienced, it was something I enforced. I saw how lack was planted, how financial ceilings were set, how generations were trained to struggle and call it normal. I saw how people worked hard, prayed hard, believed hard, and still never broke through. And I want you to hear this carefully. It was never because God didn't want to provide. They are cycles, they are systems, there are permissions, and tonight we are exposing them. I remember sitting in rooms where money was discussed like a spirit, not a resource, where poverty was treated like an inheritance that could be passed down without anyone noticing. Families didn't know why every business failed at the same stage, why sudden expenses always swallowed breakthroughs, why opportunities appeared and then disappeared. From the outside, it looked like bad luck. From the spirit realm, it was something much darker. Poverty is not always about empty pockets. Sometimes it's about exhausted souls. People stuck in survival mode for so long that they forget abundance was ever promised to them. Survival thinking keeps you busy but never fruitful. It keeps you tired but never fulfilled. And that is exactly how cycles are maintained, by keeping people too tired to question why nothing changes. January is a night where questions must be asked. I want you to understand something important. Not every financial struggle is a curse, but every generational cycle of lack has a spiritual root. When patterns repeat across bloodlines, when the same endings show up with different faces, it is no longer coincidence. It is structure, and structures must be dismantled deliberately. I have watched families where children were born already under financial strain, not because of choices they made, but because of doors opened long before they existed. Agreements made in ignorance, objects kept without understanding, words spoken over households that never got cancelled. Poverty thrives where truth is hidden. That's why exposure is dangerous to it. The moment you see clearly, system starts to collapse. I remember the first time I realized how deeply money and spirituality were connected. I saw people pray for blessings while unknowingly honoring the very things blocking them. I saw homes that were spiritually cluttered, carrying symbols of lack, debt, and limitation passed down like furniture, never questioned. I saw people sow seeds but harvest nothing because the ground itself was bound. And here's what shocked me most. Many of these people loved God deeply. So please hear me when I say this. This is not about condemnation. This is about alignment. February 1 is not about chasing money. It is about removing what has been chasing you. There is a reason some of you feel an unusual stirring as this night approaches. A restlessness, a holy discomfort. It's because your spirit knows you were not created to barely make it. You were not designed to live paycheck to paycheck emotionally, spiritually, or financially. God's supply is not luxury, it is sufficiency with peace. But supply cannot flow where survival is normalized. I want to tell you a story. There was a family I encountered where every generation had the same testimony. We almost made it, almost bought the house, almost finished the business, almost broke through, almost. That word followed them like a shadow. And when we traced it back, it didn't start with them. It started with a decision made in desperation generations earlier, a trade made to survive, not realizing the cost would echo forward. Survival, trades always demand future payment, is why tonight matters. FBR1 is not a magical night, it is a strategic one. A night where truth confronts history, where light enters places that have stayed hidden out of fear, tradition, or ignorance. And when light enters, cycles lose authority. Some of you have done everything right in the natural. You studied, you worked, you saved, you prayed, and yet something invisible kept pushing you back to the starting line. That invisible resistance is what we are addressing, not with fear, but with authority. Because authority changes outcomes. When God supplies, He doesn't just add, He restores. He doesn't just give, He realigns. And He doesn't just bless, He removes what was stealing. Tonight is about stepping out of survival and into trust. Not passive trust, but informed trust. The kind of trust that knows who God is and who He is not. The kind that refuses to accept lack as a permanent identity. I need you to understand this deeply. Poverty survives on silence. It grows stronger when people think their struggle is personal failure instead of spiritual interference. But once exposed, it loses its legal ground. That's why I'm speaking now, because FBI UI1 is not just about breaking financial curses. It's about breaking the mindset that says this is just how my family is. No, this is where it stops. This is where provision is no longer blocked by old doors, old agreements, old objects, old beliefs. This is where the story changes. And as we move deeper, I will show you how cycles are identified, how provision gets blocked, and how God restores flow where there has been drought, not through superstition, not through fear, but through truth that dismantles darkness. Stay with me because this is only the beginning. As we go deeper, I want you to understand that cycles don't break by accident. They break when truth meets obedience. And this is where many people struggle, not because they don't love God, but because they don't realize how deeply some doors are woven into everyday life. Poverty does not always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides behind culture, sometimes behind tradition, sometimes behind objects that seem harmless, and sometimes behind words that were spoken so long ago that no one remembers who said them first. But everyone is still living under their weight. I remember realizing how quietly these doors they open. No dramatic rituals, no obvious signs, just small permissions left unchecked, items kept just in case, beliefs repeated without examination, family sayings like we've never been good with money or people like us don't get ahead. These statements may sound harmless, but they carry authority when they're believed. Words build systems. In the spirit realm, repetition equals agreement, and agreement is what gives cycles their strength. I saw a home where prayer was happening daily, yet provision was still blocked. Not because prayer was weak, but because contradiction was present. You cannot declare abundance while honoring lack at the same time. You cannot ask God to bless what you are unwilling to examine. This is not about paranoia, it's about awareness. A Bay War is a night of alignment. Alignment means removing what doesn't belong so that what does belong can finally flow. I remember one moment very clearly. I watched a family receive an unexpected financial opportunity, something that could have changed everything, and within days chaos entered, sudden conflict, unexpected expenses, emotional pressure, and the opportunity slipped away. When I looked beyond the surface, I saw resistance, not random hardship resistance. Provision attracts opposition when it threatens long-standing systems. This is why many breakthroughs collapse just before manifestation, not because God changed his mind, but because something unseen pushed back. And unless that resistance is confronted, the pattern repeats. Some of you have felt that pushback your entire lives. Every time you get close, something happy and nice. Every time you move forward, something pulls you back. That is not coincidence. That is a gate that age has not yet been shut. And gates close through authority, not effort. I need you to hear this. Working harder does not break spiritual resistance. Praying louder does not cancel legal grounds. Only truth, repentance, and authority applied correctly can do that. This is why exposure is mercy. When light enters, excuses leave. There are people listening who are taught to survive, not to steward. Survival teaches you to hoard. Stewardship teaches you to trust. Survival says, I can't let go because there may never be enough. Stewardship says God is my source, not this resource. Poverty thrives where fear leads. Decisions and fear is never from God. February 01 is a night where fear loses its voice. I want to talk about something. Many people avoid emotional poverty because financial lack often follow emotional wounds. When people grow up watching stress, anxiety, and conflict tied to money, they inherit more than habits. They inherit trauma, and trauma shapes decisions silently. Some of you don't spend not because you're wise, but because you're afraid. Some of you give not because you trust, but because you fear loss. These patterns feel normal until you realize they're not neutral. They're reactive. God's supply flows best where there is peace. That's why breaking poverty is not just about money. It's about healing. Healing the relationship with provision. Healing the image of God as a father who provides, not withholds. Healing the belief that struggle equals whole line, as struggle does not impress God, obedience does. I've seen people romanticize lack as humility, but humility is trusting God enough to receive what He gives without shame. Poverty mentality rejects provision even when it arrives. That is another door that must close. February 1 is a night where receiving is restored. Some of you are about to step into opportunities that your old mindset would have sabotaged. That's why this exposure is happening first. God prepares the vessel before He pours the oil. Because if the vessel still believes it deserves lack, it will leak abundance. I want to say something gently, but clearly not everything you inherited was meant to be kept. Some things were meant to be confronted. Honoring your family does not mean continuing their limitations. You can respect your roots without living under their ceilings. This is not rebellion. This is redemption. When God breaks a generational cycle, He doesn't erase the past. He redeems the future. And redemption often begins with one person saying, "It stops with me." That decision carries weight in the spirit realm. I have watched cycle break in a single night because of emotion, but because of alignment, because truth was accepted, because doors were shut intentionally, because people chose God's voice over familiar patterns. February, your one is such a night, but hear me, this is not automatic. Awareness invites responsibility. Once you see, you must respond not in fear but in faith, not with superstition, but with obedience. As we move into the next part, I will speak about the moment of transition, the point where survival officially ends and supply begins, the signs that a cycle is breaking, the internal shifts that signal external change and how to walk forward without reopening doors God has closed. Stay with me because what comes next is the turning point. This is the turning point. Not the loud kind, not the dramatic kind, but the kind that rewrites direction quietly, deeply, permanently. This is where survival finally loosens its grip and supply begins to feel possible. Not because circumstance suddenly change, but because authority has shifted. Many people expect breakthrough to feel explosive, but when God breaks cycles, it often feels like clarity first, a calm knowing, a sense that something old has lost its hold on you. That is how you know a door has closed. I remember the moment I recognized this shift for myself. Nothing around me changed immediately. The numbers didn't move. The environment didn't transform overnight, but internally something was different. The panic was gone. The urgency to just get by disappeared. And where fear once drove decisions, peace took its place. Peace is a sign of alignment. When poverty breaks, the first thing that leaves is anxiety, because anxiety was never about money, it was about control. Poverty convinces you that if you don't control everything, everything will fall apart. But God's supply works through trust, not control. February YZ1 is a night where control is surrendered and replaced with confidence in God's provision. This is also where many people make a mistake. They recognize the shift, but they keep acting like the old cycle is still in charge. They expect loss. They prepare for disaster. They sabotage rest. And unknowingly, they reopen doors that were just closed. That's why walking forward matters as much as breaking free. You don't honor deliverance by looking back. You honor it by moving differently. Some of you will notice subtle changes after this night, opportunities that don't come with panic, conversations that open doors without stress, ideas that feel inspired instead of desperate. These are signs of flow, not force, striving but ordered provision. God's supply does not exhaust you. Survival always does. I want to speak to those who feel guilty even imagining abundance. You were taught that wanting more meant being ungrateful. But provision is not greed when God is the source. Wanting peace, stability, and the ability to bless others is not selfish. It's stewardship. God never condemned increase. He condemned fear, and fear has ruled long enough. FERU1 marks a release not just from poverty, but from the shame attached to it. Shame keeps people stuck. It convinces them that lack is personal failure instead of spiritual interference, and as long as shame speaks, authority stays silent. But tonight authority rises, authority does not beg. It declares you are not stepping into luck. You are stepping into alignment, and alignment attracts provision naturally. When your beliefs, actions, and identity agree with God's truth, resistance loses its footing. This is why cycles seed and not survive exposure. I want you to understand something powerful. When a generational curse breaks, it doesn't just affect you. It alters what your children inherit. It changes the default setting of your bloodline. Instead of struggle, they inherit stability. Instead of fear, they inherit confidence. Instead of lack, they inherit wisdom. That is legacy. And legacy is worth fighting for. Some of you are the first in your family to even hear this truth. That alone tells you something. You were chosen to confront what others normalized. You were trusted with revelation because you were strong enough to carry it. Breaking cycle is not easy, but it is sacred. February RY1 is not the end of the journey. It is the beginning of a new pattern, a pattern of discernment, of intentional living, of honoring God, not just in prayer, but in choices. Because provision flows where obedience stays, you will need to guard what God gives you, not with fear, but with wisdom, not by isolating yourself, but by staying aware. Old doors may try to reopen through old habits, old voices, old environments, but now you see, and seeing changes everything. Light is not something you unlearn. I want to leave you with this truth. God's supply was never the problem. The blockage was never his reluctance. It was unauthorized access. And tonight, access is revoked. No more almost. No more cycles. No more survival. This is where you step into a different rhythm, where provision flows without panic, where work bears fruit, where effort meets favor, where rest is not a luxury but a lifestyle. A full Y1 is not about chasing blessings. It is about walking in alignment. And alignment always leads to abundance. Stay grounded, stay obedient, stay aware. What you've just heard is not theory. It is not speculation. It is truth drawn from the hidden realms where cycles were maintained, opportunities were blocked, and lives were quietly shaped. Tonight you've seen how Fibar UA1 is not just a date but a spiritual marker, a night that challenges what has been normalized and invites alignment with God's provision. Now I need you to act. Don't let this moment pass. Examine the areas in your life where old doors may still be open. Beliefs, habits, words, and objects that carry authority over your destiny. Speak truth over your household. Declare that survival ends today. Declare that cycles break, that provision flows, that your family will inherit abundance, not limitation. If this message touched you, don't keep it to yourself. Share it with someone who needs freedom tonight. Comment below with, "I receive it." If you're ready to step into alignment and watch God restore what was blocked, subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a night where revelation meets obedience. Stay vigilant, stay prayerful, and watch how your life begins to shift from survival to supernatural provision.